Well, those ancient Jews knew how to do ritual, right? I love that image of the sprinkling of the blood. But for Catholics, nothing says I love you like a little tasteless cracker and some cheap wine. We're simple folk. Jesus takes the opportunity at that Passover to give entirely new meaning and depth and range to this covenant that God has with God's people. And he does it in a simple way, but a full way, because ultimately it's about him dying for us, giving his life. Covenant is an agreement, but it's not just a tit-for-tat agreement. It's with our covenant with God is God delivering whether we deliver or not. And that especially comes into focus with this new covenant with Jesus. It's about God's love. It's about God's unconditional love. Even if, or should I say when, we don't live up to our part of the covenant, God is there, always there, so deeply there. And this covenant is sealed not with this dramatic, but to us odd and ultimately maybe even impotent gesture of the sacrifice of the animals and sprinkling of the blood. But this is a covenant sealed with not our actions, but God's action, God's sacrifice of himself through his Son. And that's what makes it the eternal covenant, the unfailing covenant, and brings into focus even more this the unconditionality of this covenant of love. It's so good for John Paul and I. It means so much for us to be able to celebrate our 25th anniversary as priests with you all. We spent a good half of these 25 years with this community, and so we wanted to share with you the credit and the blame for the priests we've become, because you have formed us. And so thank you for allowing us to share this celebration with you all. You know, probably John Paul and I, in some ways, had no idea what we were getting into when we entered the order together 33 years ago, even when we were ordained 25 years ago. I mean, you know, you kind of know, but you don't really know. And for me, so much, I think, of my life as a priest has been thinking it's about me, as a priest and leading us in the Eucharist, trying to communicate, trying to express God's unconditional love, this covenant. And it is about that, but ultimately, it's my job as a priest is to remember, to claim, to let myself be imbued with that love myself. It's not about what I do. It's about my weakness as a human being and finding God's strength and power, God's love in that. This sabbatical year that I've been celebrating and still milking every last day out of, I have another month or so. By the way, some people have been asking, I'll be continuing campus ministry up at Stanford, which is one place where Father John Paul spent some years. And so that's will be a very life-giving assignment, I think. And so the sabbatical year has been a time to really allow that love of God to fill me, to not find my value in doing for others. I haven't been doing, I've been doing more being. Even that traveling that some of you know about that I've done with this Village Harmony Choir to South Africa and Cuba, and then coming up at the end of this month, Bosnia again. They're pilgrimages. They become pilgrimages, and discovering God's love in new cultures and other people. I've been discovering God's love anew through family, through friends. Got to spend some good time with John Paul in Tucson a couple times. And we're going to spend some time together later this month. And different Dominicans, the Dominicans I've been living in Iraq, the Dominicans I've met on these travels. And it's so good to be reminded of God's love that I've experienced through this community by celebrating here today. So that's been my task during the sabbatical, is to receive that unconditional love so that I can continue to, in my own fragile way, share that with you all and others. And all the sacraments, of course, are about entering anew this eternal covenant of God's love so that we can share that love, invite others into the covenant of love. But again, first of all, it's about us receiving the love. All the sacraments are about that. This sacrament that we especially celebrate today on this Feast of the Body and Blood of Christ is the clearest way that we celebrate that covenantal love, because this is a remembrance of that time when Jesus, I think, maybe desperately, was trying to express his love to his disciples and knew his death was coming. And I wonder how much of this was planned. I could almost see him saying, well, here, this bread that we share every year at Passover, that's me. This cup, it's my blood. I don't know if he planned it. That whole gospel is kind of mysterious, isn't it? The way his disciples say, where do we celebrate? Where are we going to prepare the Passover for you? And I read a commentary a couple weeks ago that said, oh yeah, Jesus had it all planned. He had, talked with these people ahead of time. Well, I don't know. I certainly never thought of it that way. I thought it was more mysterious than that. Somehow just Jesus knew that this guy was going to be waiting with is it a jug? And he knew that when he took him to this other house, the guy would be able to comply and say, oh yeah, I knew you were coming. Yeah, you'll be in the upper room. There's something very mysterious about it. Yes, Jesus planned it and is in charge, but not the way we would plan things, not the way the Vakis have planned these wonderful receptions today, So you wish it could be that mysterious and just magical, huh? And so Jesus, this is what we celebrate in the sacrament. Jesus, remembering Jesus saying, this is my body, this is my blood. And so it is very simple. It's, I said it a little flippantly about the cracker and the cheap wine, but it comes from this very simple Passover meal, which was about a kind of fast food, right? Gird yourselves and remember, the flight. Be prepared for the flight, and don't even take time to leaven the bread. And that's what we remember. It's very simple. It's not this dramatic sprinkling of the blood, but it doesn't have to be because it's already happened for us. So God calls us to this sacrament. God calls us together from so many places and from the anxieties of our lives, the stresses of our lives, calls us to the Sunday Eucharist. We hear God's word of love, that covenantal, unconditional love, each Sunday. And then we gather around the altar for the Eucharistic prayer. Now, I've always been conscious as a priest, I get to say so many of these words and that maybe you're not always feeling involved. Some of you are good at feeling involved. When I'm in the pews, which I've been doing a lot of this year, it's hard for me to feel involved because my mind just wanders, even though I'm very familiar with these prayers. It might be easy to kind of treat the Eucharistic prayer as just kind of the user agreement for some app. And then the communion part that's the fun part. That's the good part. But it's not just this user agreement to ignore. It's this user covenant. And even if we don't catch all the words, it's meant, this Eucharistic prayer, to be all of our prayer. It's actions of thanksgiving, of praise, of remembrance. And so we're just present as we're able to that wonderful mystery that the priest says a lot of the words about, but it's all our prayer. It's maybe it's like the marriage vows. Speaking of the sacrament of God's covenantal, unconditional love. It's like the marriage vows. And then the communion, the wonderful communion, is maybe like the sharing of the rings. It's the finishing up of the celebration of this wonderful Thanksgiving, this love that we're celebrating. And again, it may not be very dramatic for us. For some people, it's easily dramatic. Every Sunday, every time they receive communion, it's a wonderful drama. For some of us, it's not so much. But we just do the best we can to be present. Because it's not about what we do, it's about God giving to us. We do what we can to just receive that unconditional love so that we can share it with others.